For the rest of my life, I wished I had wed Diane. You can never get back the one person who makes you want to stay in a relationship once you let them go. With his outstanding performances, multi-layered personalities, and fearless independence, Al Pacino has enchanted audiences for decades. However, out of sight, one mystery has persisted. One of Hollywood's all-time greats has never tied the knot. Why is that? Following Diane Keaton's death, Pacino, at the age of 85, finally offered an honest response. Pacino had numerous mistresses during his life, including beautiful actresses and talented musicians. The one and only Diane Keaton was the rightful owner of his heart, though. In addition to being Pacino's co-star in The Godfather, the lady who played Kay Adams was the one love that plagued him throughout his life. Engaging in a relationship with another lady while still loving Diane was one instance of weakness. He lost the only lady who ever understood him because he had an affair with Jan Tarrant, which resulted to their child. Would you imagine that a man who captivated countless ladies in the past could experience such profound loneliness? Could Al Pacino muster the courage to reaffirm his grip on Diane Keaton's hand if he could go back in time? Let's use this story to figure it out. Never having tied the knot has been one of Al Pacino's most fascinating life decisions. His life was still a mystery even after decades of shining a light on him through demanding jobs, health problems, and behind-the-scenes challenges. Pacino, now 85 years old, spoke quietly and deliberately about the true motivation behind that choice. He did concede that he would never forget a certain woman, an individual whose recollection continued to ache with each passing year. Even at one point, he was on the verge of getting married. "I nearly did it," he murmured. "I took a step back, though." Pacino previously stated in his autobiography Sonny Boy that he steered clear of marriage due to his reluctance to endure the associated suffering. However, readers could detect an additional element amidst those cautious sentences: feelings of regret, heartbreak about losing touch with the woman who roused his passion. Maybe that was the turning point when Pacino started to follow his own rules. Love but release. He was always open to love. For whatever reason, he just stopped thinking that a marriage could improve his life. Pacino couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia whenever he talked about love. Once he said, "I have loved deeply. Indeed. Everything that could have been was lost on me." The city lights reflecting on a face that had lived too long in brilliance yet bore the sadness of shadows. That was the revelation of a close friend of Pacino's, who said that on certain evenings Pacino would sit quietly for hours, staring out the window of his Beverly Hills house. Years went by. He continued to live in love. After that first soul-starring encounter, no other woman could compare. "I don't think loving anyone matters anymore. I once had the chance to marry, and I let it go." His voice, harsh and low, sounded like a confession and closure, as he said this in response to reporters' questions. At 85 years old, let's try to remember just one name from Al Pacino's extensive list of loves. The one he would always feel guilty about losing. Jill Clayburgh is one of them. The first public crush on Al Pacino happened in 1967, when he was a young, aspiring actor in New York City battling for little theatrical parts. The young artist Jill Clayburgh was just starting out when he crossed paths with her. They crossed paths during a dark and sparsely attended audition for a production off-Broadway. To be seen, to have their voices heard, to make a name for themselves. Those were the burning desires of these young, idealistic people. Amidst late-night practices and expensive wine, and lengthy discussions about lofty goals, their love grew. It didn't take long for them to become a beloved theater pair in New York. They reportedly didn't require a script when they performed together on stage. The story was told by their looks. According to what Clayburgh mentioned once, Pacino was an artist first and foremost. Possibly that is the reason she was so captivated. Pacino, who was still trying to figure out his role, found solace in Jill, an individual who might empathize with the fears and aspirations that young actors experience. They believed in the possibility of love and art coexisting, lived in a small apartment together in Manhattan, and shared hopes for the future. Passion, however, may both illuminate and engulf a young artist's romantic relationships. The boundary between ambition and reality started to show when Pacino's reputation surged following The Godfather. While Pacino was swept up in the storm of fame and stress, Jill continued to try to regain her balance. "Two actors living together is ridiculous," Jill later remarked. "One goes to Detroit, the other to Minnesota. You both get tired, and no one has the energy to listen." The distance between them was no longer physical, it was emotional. Their 5-year affair discreetly ended by 1972, before Pacino's star lighted across Hollywood. Silence and a protracted emptiness that persisted in both lives replaced a violent altercation and an emotional farewell. Jill later admitted, "I went through it all, hating myself, hating him. Pain, anger, fear." Pacino rarely spoke of that love, but those close to him said it left a mark. The kind of ache you feel when you know you lost something vital and it's too late to fix it. Some said Jill Clayburgh was the first woman who made Al Pacino think about marriage, but he never did it. Maybe because he knew in his world marriage was a promise he couldn't keep. In a later interview, when asked why he never married, Pacino just smiled. "I once loved deeply, but some things, if done too late, no longer feel right." Many believed he was talking about Jill. 2. Martha Keller, The Fragile Affair. Before fame reached its height, Al Pacino had a fleeting romance with Swiss actress Martha Keller. They met in 1977 while filming Bobby Deerfield, a philosophical love story directed by Sidney Pollack, on set in Europe. Amid the melancholy of racetracks and quiet introspection, the two young actors found something intense yet delicate, as if the movie itself had written their destiny. It was said that even when the cameras stopped rolling, they kept talking, sometimes in silence, sometimes with knowing glances. Keller once said in a rare interview, "My feelings for Al were my own. I feel like I'm exposing my very essence just talking about them." They spent 2 years caught between two worlds, the spotlight of Hollywood and the quiet of Europe. While Keller was getting rave reviews in Hollywood and France, Pacino was giddy from The Godfather in Dog Day Afternoon. They loved one another with the depth of an artist, but their love also drove a wedge between them. Their relationship became delicate, like a scenario played too often, due to the constant changing of identities required by their roles, production schedules, and airplane rides. Lovely but unauthenticated now. By 1979, they had already begun to drift apart. Keller went back to Europe and started performing opera and theater, while Pacino remained in Hollywood and continued to rise to stardom. In Hollywood, Pacino met the one he would always remember. He felt the name etched into his own being. Keaton Diane, the number 3, Patricia Keaton. Pacino felt remorse for not wedlocking with this woman. Diane Keaton and Al Pacino first crossed paths in the early 1970s on the set of The Godfather. Diane debuted as K. Mr. Adams. Pacino portrayed Michael Corleone, icy and imposing. But the character was kind and reasonable. They began to act more and more as they did on TV. Despite the intense scenes, Keaton found love with Pacino. She claimed that I fell head over heels for him the instant I laid eyes on him. His intelligence, humor, and stunning good looks were overwhelming. Their love remained silent. It was murky and low, like a river flowing just under the surface. As two solitary spirits who could relate to one another in the glitz and solitude of the entertainment industry, they joined forces. It was Keaton, Pacino said, who made him feel noticed. She brought him joy, soothed his nerves, and forced him to confront his own demons. Passionate yet delicate, they discovered a rhythm despite their powerful personalities. They were never really close though. Home was what Diane yearned for. Paco was afraid about committing. It never arrived, despite her hopes that he would propose once. The pursuit of fame and independence engulfed Pacino. She told me I didn't have to have a proposal. His promise to marry me never materialized, but I clung to the hope that it would. She issued a final ultimatum to him. Either we tie the knot or we part ways. It came to a close when Pacino remained silent. Their love was unfinished but genuine, and they continued to show each other respect and devotion. No longer were they romantically involved after the 1990 conclusion of The Godfather Part 3. Diane got up and left. Pacino chose not to speak. Even after all these years, he couldn't shake her memory. Whenever he brought her up in an interview, his expression would soften. He went on to say that she was the most remarkable woman he had ever encountered. Not marrying her was probably the worst decision I've ever made. After breaking up with Diane Keaton, the one woman he had serious feelings for, Pacino appeared to close his heart to the idea of getting married. That love emptied a space that could never be filled. Behind the myth was a lonely guy who longed for love but was terrified of commitment, and Diane saw him for who he really was. His faith in the possibility of love and the artist's life coexisting evaporated when their love ended. After that, Pacino preferred to be alone. No one ever managed to get to the emotional space where Diane formerly resided. Despite their fame and beauty, the women who trailed after were but passing figures on his long, lonely road. According to individuals close to Pacino, he was crushed by Diane Keaton's death. He had previously commented, "I've loved, but no one made me want to marry the way she did." He withdrew from public view, retreated to his room, and refused any expressions of sympathy or contact. An intimate acquaintance of Pacino's recounted him sitting quietly, gazing at vintage Godfather images of the two of them, and murmuring, "If only I hadn't let her go." Not marrying Diane remains the worst regret of his life. There was more to the anguish than the loss of a buddy. The knowledge that he had lost his greatest love caused it. In every legendary part he has ever done, Pacino has managed to capture a glimpse, or an unspoken word, of Diane. He saw Keaton as more than just a co-star. She was the one who showed him the ropes of love and remorse. Rather from viewing Diane as a mere romantic interest, Pacino saw her as an irrevocable part of his life story. In a brief interview after she passed away, he stated, "When certain people enter your life, you realize there is no one else on this planet who is quite like them." He may have spoken about her publicly for the first time that day, quietly but eerily. Is this sad love story something you can relate to? Let us know what you think by leaving a comment. Another reason Keaton and Pacino parted up after 15 years was that Pacino genuinely regretted loving Jan Tarrant, the man he had an affair with and had a child with. Jan Tarrant, the most irreverent lover, number 4. While he was head over heels for Diane, he crossed paths with Jan Tarrant, an ardent young acting coach. They were in a classroom together, discussing the art form and the anxieties that performers face on stage, and some other emotions started to germinate. Diane was aware. It was his fault, not hers. She just went her own way. "You need freedom more than a home," she whispered one afternoon as they parted ways, her voice so low that Pacino could almost hear her. A turning point in his life came from his contact with Jan Tarrant. The first of Jan Pacino's daughters, Julie Marie Pacino, was born in 1989. With his hands shaking under the newfound weight of fatherhood, Al stood outside the delivery room. However, he remained dubious in his heart as to whether or not the object of his affection was love. The chemistry between him and Jan rapidly waned thereafter. After Chino and Jan Tarrant's separation, which occurred the same year Julie was born, Chino took full parental responsibility and poured his love into his daughter without mentioning Jan Tarrant. In an interview, when asked about that time, he simply said, "I'm not good at relationships. I hurt a lot of people, maybe even myself." 5. Lindel Hobbs, the woman who saved Pacino from his own darkness. After breaking up with Jan Tarrant, Al Pacino fell into a long void. He kept working, still one of Hollywood's greatest actors. But deep down, he felt himself drifting away from everything warm and ordinary in life. It was during this time that he met Lindel Hobbs, an Australian director with confidence, vitality, and a bold spirit. They had crossed paths briefly at a Los Angeles party in the early 1980s. But nearly a decade later, after both had weathered life's bruises, they truly entered each other's lives. Lindel Hobbs was different from the women before her. She was articulate, sharp, and had her own distinctive view of art. As a director, she understood the loneliness behind the scenes and the brutal nature of acting. Perhaps that was why Pacino found in her a sense of empathy he had rarely felt before. In the early days, they would spend hours in a small Beverly Hills apartment talking about movies, about roles, and about the fear of growing old while still being alone. Pacino once told her half-jokingly, "You know what? Sometimes I just want to be a normal person, not always acting." Their relationship lasted throughout the early 1990s. Hobbs once described Pacino as a complicated man, sometimes warm, sometimes ice-cold. He loved with intensity, but always kept an invisible distance, as if afraid that getting too close would make everything collapse. Even so, Lindel stayed by his side for years, accepting the ups and downs of a man constantly consumed by film sets and the emotions demanded by his roles. But like many of his previous loves, their differences eventually became an unbridgeable gap. Lindel Hobbs wanted a real home, wanted children, while Pacino was never ready for that. She once said, "He can give his soul to a role, but he's terrified of giving his life to a person." When he heard that, Pacino stayed silent. He knew she was right, and he knew it meant they couldn't continue together. When Lindel decided to adopt a child, Pacino supported her but remained distant. The relationship gradually cooled, and they quietly broke up in the mid-1990s. No statements, no drama. Years later, Lindel said in an interview, "Al is a great man, but he doesn't belong to anyone. I thought I could change that, but no one can." 6. Beverly D'Angelo, the woman who gave him a family. Pacino's love stories didn't end there. In the mid-1990s, he met Beverly D'Angelo, an American actress known for her gentle beauty and intelligent eyes. From the start, they seemed to find solace in each other. Beverly brought Pacino the sense of family he had never known. She was not only a lover but also a companion, someone who understood both the moments he lost himself in a role and those when he wanted to hide from the world. Pacino, who had once declared that marriage was a luxury he didn't dare step into, seemed for the first time to consider having children, having a home. D'Angelo later recalled, "He told me, if not now, then I'll never have a family." And indeed, in 2001, they welcomed twins, Anton James and Olivia Rose, the embodiment of love and Pacino's rare moment of courage. However, that love started to shift once the children were born. In his family life, Pacino's fastidious and reclusive personality started to show. Beverly, who is known for her independence and strong will, felt trapped in a role that she had always wished she could escape. Little disagreements escalated into larger ones. She had previously stated in an interview, "He wants everything his way, even love." At the same time, Pacino felt misunderstood and confined by a life of excessive obligations and inadequate independence, the thing that terrified him the most. The couple divorced in 2003. The split was contentious. Pacino and D'Angelo even battled in court for child custody. Headlines like "Pacino takes twins' mom to court" circulated throughout the media. They both eventually decided to keep quiet. Beverly spoke clean about the situation, saying, "We both love our children in our own way. We just couldn't love each other anymore." After the storm subsided, they were able to find peace as co-parents now. They continued to raise Anton and Olivia as a couple even after their romance ended. Pacino was spotted walking beside D'Angelo and their children on rare occasions. With no stage, there can be no show. The statement, "Whatever happens, he's still the father of my children," was made by Beverly to People magazine and will remain in perpetuity. The 40-year-old love story of Savan and Lucila Sola. Lucila Sola, a stunning Argentine actress about 40 years his junior, became Al Pacino's partner shortly after his breakup with Beverly, further proving his undeniable charisma. In Los Angeles, they crossed paths via a common acquaintance. Even though some were skeptical of them because of their age gap, the two found a unique bond. Lucila once said, "When I talk to him, I forget we belong to different generations." As for Pacino, when asked about her, he simply smiled and said, "She makes me feel young again." They appeared together at many events, hand in hand. Like true companions, sometimes Lucila brought along her daughter, Camila, to meet Pacino. He loved Camila like his own child, and later when she dated Leonardo DiCaprio, Pacino remained close like a second father, yet their relationship wasn't without cracks. Pacino in his 70s was accustomed to solitude and freedom, while Lucila still craved new experiences, travels and roles. We loved each other, but we lived differently. Lucila said in an interview in Buenos Aires, Pacino, though deeply in love, had never been one to stay bound for long. They were together but never lived under the same roof, each keeping their own space, and that distance slowly became the reason their love faded. When they broke up in 2018, Lucila said gently, "We're still family, still friends." The end of that chapter is all. Friends say Pacino was depressed for months following the film, though he remained silent. What are your thoughts on this romantic tale? He addressed the question of Lucila in an unusual interview by saying, "She's part of my life," and by adding, "Some things, once they've existed, can never truly be lost." Then we can talk about Pacino's next relationship, which he had with another beautiful actress, Noor Alfallah. Noor Alfallah, the love affair that began when Al Pacino was 82 years old and continued to bear a child to Pacino as he was 83. His contemporaries assumed he had seen it all when it came to love. Strangely, Noor Alfallah then showed up. A young film producer just 30 years old whose stunning good looks evoked both Hollywood and the Middle East. They crossed paths at a movie party and started talking about movies. In contrast, Pacino discovered a revitalizing new vitality in Noor, despite having spent his entire life in the limelight. He possessed a wisdom and depth that is uncommon among youth, which Noor observed with admiration. Their romance started under the radar until April of 2022, when it was finally exposed by the media. Everyone was taken aback. Pacino at 82 years old, or at 29 years old, a generational divide of 54 years. Time seemed to stand still while they were together. Roman Pacino's son was born in June 2023. With a rare and lovely smile, 83-year-old Al Pacino discussed parenthood. "I've been a parent before, but this one was different since it arrived when I least expected it." As he strolled alongside Noor, onlookers saw that he appeared to be a young man going through the initial stages of parenting. Roman was more than only the offspring of Noor and her husband. He was also the link that united two families. However, in the end, disagreements surfaced as they did in all of Pacino's relationships. He was also not enthusiastic about new experiences, projects, or travel. Despite Pacino's preference for solitary evenings spent viewing classic films, they continued to care for one another, and their love eventually blossomed into a profound relationship. As the media reported, they quietly separated by the end of the 20th to the 23rd. Now in his elderly years, Al Pacino lives alone in his enormous home, accompanied only by the echoes of films and old photographs. Every one of the ladies he loved throughout his life left their own unique imprint on his private sky. Sadly, not a single one of them stuck around to see him through to the finish. Feelings of intense love have waned. There is now only remembrance and quiet after the resounding applause of performances. Therefore, how has Al Pacino's life actually been? He had an impressive career. How did he get there? Alfredo James Pacino came from humble Italian American parents and was born on April 25, 1940, in New York City's East Harlem. He went on to become one of the most iconic figures in modern cinema, all from those modest origins. Pacino swiftly cemented his position among the golden age of 1970s Hollywood with his intense stare, gruff voice, and unfiltered emotional intensity. As an example of overcoming obstacles and reaching one's full artistic potential, his rise from New York City's streets to the top is inspiring. The dynamic energy of New York City had a great impact on Pacino as a young actor, inspiring him to create a realistic and true performance. His entire career was shaped by the ideology method acting, which he studied at Lee Strasberg's Actor Studio from 1966 to 1969. During this time, he broke into the film industry thanks to his performance in the Indian film Once in the Bronx, for which he received the renowned Obie Award. Pacino played a heroin addict in New York in his 1971 feature film debut, The Panic in Needle Park. His unfiltered performance shocked reviewers and piqued Francis Ford Coppola's interest. Despite studio opposition, Coppola eventually cast him as Michael Corleone in The Godfather, a decision that altered cinematic history. With 1972's The Godfather, Pacino became an international superstar. An everlasting symbol of the tragedy of power became his portrayal of Michael Corleone, a good-hearted son turned vicious mafia don. This part paved the way for a series of outstanding performances and garnered him his first Academy Award nomination. Among Pacino's most famous roles was 1983's Scarface, in which he played Tony Montana opposite Brian Delma. Tragically cruel and courageous, Tony was a drug lord. They instruct you on how to think and what to do. Is being a sheep your ideal way of life? Tony Montana became an icon of the 1980s counterculture thanks to the line, which became ingrained in popular culture. Scarface, despite initial backlash, went on to become a classic, and Al Pacino received praise for his intense performance as the title character. During the late 1980s, there were obstacles. The failure of Revolution 1985 was Pacino's lowest point after a string of successes. He went back to the theater for balance and inspiration after nearly withdrawing from film. His love for performing, though, remained unquenchable. He triumphantly returned to the big screen in 1989 with the romantic criminal thriller Sea of Love, which rekindled his audience connection with its raw and tenderness. Returning to his role as Michael Corleone, Pacino brought the sad arc of the film to a close in 1990 with The Godfather. Part 3. His performance was the heart and soul of the film, even though audiences had conflicting reactions. When he played the blind Rude, and Honorable Colonel Frank Slade in Scent of a Woman 2 years later, he achieved new heights. This portrayal was a watershed moment in Pacino's career, as it brought him his first Academy Award, which he had been waiting for. In the same year, he was once again crowned with an Oscar nomination for Glengarry Glen Ross. Playing the role of a real estate salesman beaten down by disappointment and avarice, Pacino showed the tragic human side of ambition. He had an unparalleled talent for elevating common folks to the status of icons of their time. The 1995 film Heat was the first to include an on-screen confrontation between Pacino and Robert De Niro. Michael Mann directed the performance, which presented two men, a police officer and a criminal, who, strangely, had a profound understanding of one another. Their tense cafe scene together proved that Al Pacino was an acting prodigy who could control his emotions with deft precision. As the new millennium began, Pacino maintained his stellar performance in cinema and television. He played a tired and guilty detective in 2002's Insomnia. He proved his creative vigor with Emmy Awards for his work on HBO shows including You Don't Know Jack Lay 2010 and Angels in America's 2003. Playing Jimmy Hoffa again in 2019's The Irishman. Directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, he made a triumphant reappearance, earning another Oscar nomination and captivating a new generation. Pacino created a character that was both rebellious and profoundly real. As a quiet coda to his illustrious half-century career, The Irishman spoke on the force of aging and the price of loyalty. There was no indication that Al Pacino would slow down in the 2020s. In the Amazon series Hunters, he played the role of a Holocaust survivor who, in the 1970s America, led a group in their quest for Nazis. In it, Pacino was able to go into themes of justice, resilience, and shame. He still gave acting his whole attention at the age of 80, viewing it as a dynamic art form rather than a bygone era. After the success of 88 Minutes and the critical acclaim for Righteous Kill, Pacino's career took a dip in the early 2000s. His once powerful vocals and intense facial expressions were now seen as excessive. Nevertheless, audiences now have a more objective perspective to admire him. The Irishman 2019 by Martin Scorsese confirmed that Al Pacino is still one of the best actors working today. He garnered renewed Oscar acclaim for his powerful and moving performance as Jimmy Hoffa. Pacino is still passionate, conflicted, and stubborn even as he ages. I quit cigarettes long ago, but I still smoke cigars just for fun. That one line sums up his life philosophy. He consistently prioritizes being genuine over being disciplined or indulgent in his art and in life. For decades, Pacino has fought a silent fight behind the shouting crowds and flashing lights. The fight he had with smoking. Cigarettes were practically associated with artists during the golden age of Hollywood. Representations of power, defiance, and magnetic personality. Cigarettes seemed to be an extension of Pacino's soul as he smoked them with deadly seriousness and an icy air. From cold-blooded criminals to lonesome nomads. However, things evolve. That glorification of smoking quickly faded as the risks were brought to light. It was now considered antiquated, the rough masculinity that had made Pacino famous. He was part of a generation of performers pushed by the public to face the realities of habits that were formerly admired for their elegance. Pacino finally left the show. Still, he lets himself light up once in a while for enjoyment. That straightforward admission embodies his philosophy, as he had already stated. Always moderate, never stifling little pleasures. The key is to find a happy medium. Just like with his artwork, he isn't looking for flawlessness. In spite of all his paradoxes, he strives for harmony. But it doesn't mean his life was always peaceful. A commission dispute drove Pacino and his long-standing agency, International Creative Management, into a lawsuit in 2015. His film earnings allegedly went underpaid. Fortunately, the matter was resolved in a low-key manner and did not damage his reputation. It is evident that Al Pacino has had it all when one considers his life thus far. Success, admiration, money, and the affection of remarkable ladies he met. Diane Keaton, Jan Tarrant, Lindel Hobbs, Lucila Sola, Noor Alfallah, and Beverly D'Angelo all made distinct impressions on audiences emotionally. Maybe it's because he loved too much, lived too passionately, and prioritized art above anything else. Pacino was never really anyone's. Even though he's 85 years old, he still performs under the spotlights by himself. The place where his love for the theater is unquenchable. However, as the last curtain calls, the sole sound that echoes through the air is that of a man who has experienced every hue of love yet still finds himself alone. Are you Al Pacino fans? Can you empathize with this legendary man whose broken heart has never been healed? Leave a comment with your opinions. Feel free to share your thoughts and subscribe to my channel if you're interested in hearing more behind